I don't like Snail Games, and I'm guessing it's safe to say you don't either. For being the publisher behind what was once one of the most popular games in the world, Ark Survival Evolved, their track record is genuinely terrible. From shady business ventures to that one time they banned almost 100 active players from the Conquest server network after their own employees were caught cheating, Snail Games is and continues to be nothing but a festering barnacle latched onto Ark and its developers at Studio Wildcard. So when it was announced that they were working on Aquatica, a celebratory 10th anniversary DLC for Ark Survival Evolved, which at this point had been sunset for well over a year in favor of Ark Ascended, I was skeptical. Though as Aquatica's release date swam closer and closer, it became increasingly clear that Snail had minimal involvement with the DLC outside of its oversight and its horrible marketing campaign. Rather, they had assembled an impromptu development team, Studio Sirens, to make Aquatica in their stead. And in talking to said developers, what I found was a team deeply passionate about their project, despite the bad hand they had been dealt by Snail Games. This clear dedication, in a way, came to shift my perspective on the matter. So, the lore nerd that I am, I decided to give Aquatica another shot. Not for me, not for Snail, but for Studio Sirens, who poured their hard work and effort into it. So grab your dipping nets and saddle up your Monodons as we dive into the full story of Ark Aquatica. The story of Aquatica begins like any other, on an Ark unlike any other. You see, this one tested survivors in an oceanic setting, featuring lush islands, some not so lush volcanic hellscapes, this thing, that's pretty cool actually. Oh, and Element. This thing's cooler though. The Ark's aquatic environment wasn't its only unique aspect, however. The survivors that inhabited it were equally remarkable. Over a long period of time, and somehow without the obelisks striking them down along the way, one particular generation of survivors adapted and eventually evolved to life in the underwater ecosystem, coming to form a race known as the Thalassians, which managed to develop a technologically advanced civilization centralized around Element. As for why they were never wiped off the face of the Ark by the obelisks, similar to what happened to Nosti in Scorched Earth, it can be inferred through Aquatica's explorer notes and level design that the Thalassians had essentially learned everything they could about the Ark, using this knowledge to colonize everything within its walls, including the obelisks themselves, which not only appear to have been altered in some way, considering their shift in color palette, but have also been directly intertwined into several pieces of Thalassian architecture, making the revelation that one day the entire race vanished, leaving behind everything they had created all the more mysterious. An indeterminate amount of time passes before the Aquatic Ark, now malfunctioning and long abandoned by the Thalassians, prematurely crashes into the Atlantic Ocean, long before its intended descent as a part of the Reseed Protocol. In its state of disarray, the Ark's systems were unable to purge the area of Element, allowing the xenomaterial to creep into the station's artificial environments and unleash chaos in their depths. But wait a minute. Why the hell is the Atlantic there? Where does this even take place in the timeline? I feel like now's a better time than any to bring up the fact that, while it does have its own explorer notes, Aquatica isn't actually canon to the overarching Ark narrative. Rather, it's its own contained story split between two distinct points in time. The first of which being sometime before Helena's ascension into a Homo Deus, and the second between the chosen survivor's journey through the island to aberration, before the events of extinction. Though Aquatica makes an attempt to follow a lot of the underlying rules and world building laid out by the lead writers at Studio Wildcard, it also takes some liberties of its own. This explains inconsistencies such as the moon not being destroyed and the fact that the Earth is entirely locked, which in turn explains why its oceans still exist, among many other details. No, bad kitty. Rockwell doesn't exist yet, and neither should you. It's in this non-canonical extension of the Ark narrative that we are introduced to two survivors from somewhere around the turn of the 24th century. Dr. Ingrid Weiss, a nuclear physicist who centered her studies around element before it went on to become the driving force of humanity's rapid technological advancement, and Kato, a survivalist left stranded on Earth after the corruption came into being and the arks had been sent into orbit, making it kind of a mystery as to how his engrammic matrix was even uploaded to the Ark network, since he died sometime after their departure. Regardless, these two survivors would find themselves respawned onto the shores of Aquatica, with no other choice but to conquer the Ark's flooded depths and unravel the secrets left behind by their ancient Thalassian precursors, or die trying. Upon his awakening, Kato recalls his final moments on Earth, the excruciating burn of corruption tearing its way through his body, until he felt nothing. Unaware of the fact that he had inadvertently been returned to Earth by intervention of the Ark, let alone the fact that he was even on an Ark to begin with, Kato pressed forward and began to explore his surroundings, quickly taking note of the ruins littering the waters. Meanwhile, on another part of the Ark, like Kato, Weiss finds herself washed up on the beach, recollecting her own death. Her last memory is of being blown to smithereens in a freak accident while experimenting with element. Though her final thoughts didn't consist of fear nor regret, rather frustration over the fact that the experiment's outcome didn't align with her calculations. After getting her bearings, Weiss eagerly jots down a few initial observations, such as the enclosed nature of the environment and the many ruins which adorn it. Due to their rundown appearance, Weiss assumes that she's likely alone, and continues to document her findings for any others who may come along. Kato, on the other hand, was less pleased with what he had stumbled upon. A vein of raw element proliferating in the wild. It was at this point he began to suspect where he had found himself. Calling back to the Arks, Kato sees this as his worst fears becoming realized, that the space stations were only delaying the inevitable, and that humanity's reliance on element as its saving grace had only backfired on humanity, on himself, and whoever had constructed the now abandoned structures on this Ark. Deciding that he had taken everything the surface had to offer, having just tamed several aquatic creatures as company, Kato steels himself and dives into the shallows for the first time. Weiss too turns her attention to the ocean after tracing a strange pattern of bubbles to a plant species W, a uniquely convenient flower which oxygenates its immediate area and spits out recolored plant species Y seeds. Making use of the abundant species W, Weiss continues to study the shallows, taking specific note of the area's overtly friendly fauna and their innate ability to aid humans in the water, a detail which not only links back to the Thalassians, but to how the Arks are designed as a whole. If you'll recall, Weiss is making a similar conclusion to the one Helena made during her time on the island, after studying the unnatural balance of its ecosystem, that the environment was artificially and intentionally designed around humans. In exploring the ocean's sunken buildings, Weiss eventually discovers Thalassis, the central hub of the Thalassian civilization. Here, she uncovers and makes use of their leftover tools in order to extend her underwater longevity, completely relocating under the sea down where it's wetter. Finally able to dive past the shallows, Weiss finds an intricate cave system full of crystals, each one vibrating with some kind of radiant, almost hypnotic energy. Allured as she was, Weiss eventually managed to pull herself away from the cavern long enough to return to camp, where she lied in her sleeping bag, restless and unable to take her mind off of the crystals. So the very next day, she returned with intent to further analyze them, and upon doing so, she rejoiced at her conclusion. These weren't just any crystals. No. What Weiss had found were clusters of crystallized element, which would explain her inherent gravitation towards them. With this, she would be able to resume the thesis she had held in her previous life, that the potential of element is integral to the betterment of the human race. While Weiss was exploring the Ark, completely unburdened by any sense of danger, Kato had been surviving all alone, creating primitive tools and fending off the hostile sea life. Despite his relative success in this, Kato tackling everything solo dolo was really starting to take its toll. At this point, he had been observing Weiss from a safe and cautious distance for some time, taking bitter heed of the ease she had in adjusting to life underwater. Having not seen her surface for days, he pushes himself to repair and take quarters in a dilapidated pearl structure, deeming there to be no excuse for his struggle. But Kato's constant pushing of his own limits and the consecutive sleepless nights which followed ultimately left him in a vulnerable state, culminating in him being caught off guard by a sudden rift in the waters. A clash between the raw, toxic element on the Earth's surface and the refined element present in the Ark's infrastructure, which tore a hole in space-time itself. Unable to flee from the highly aggressive creatures emerging from the anomaly, Kato was forced to fend them all off. It was clear by now, after the kerfuffle he had just experienced, that maybe trying to survive an entire fucking arc by himself wasn't the smartest of ideas. As Kato fought for his survival in a self-imposed hard mode, Weiss was doing the exact opposite of that by unearthing more ancient tech in the form of something called a hydrosphere, which drew a clear link between the Thalassians and their use of element as an integral part of their civilization, something the physicist deeply admired and wished she could have been a part of. Back at camp after a several-day expedition, Weiss is at last set upon by Kato, whom she graciously welcomes in and offers a meal, seeing this as an opportunity to bring a new pair of hands to her research. Unfortunately for her though, their opposing worldviews and motives would quickly become apparent, prompting Kato to storm off in anger. While his interests lie in fighting for survival above all else, Weiss is driven by her relentless pursuit to study element, something Kato fiercely abhors, having witnessed, hell, experienced firsthand how element destroyed life on Earth as they once knew it. The animosity he held towards Weiss wouldn't last long, however, as he reflected on his own limitations, recalling how he almost died of dehydration in his first life after thugging out the apocalypse by himself. Without the help from the others who found him, he would have perished sooner than he already did. Concluding not even a day later that things would be better off with the two of them working together, Kato returns to Weiss's base, fresh fish dinner in hand. Over the meal, Kato brings Weiss up to speed with the events that had transpired after her death, specifically the rise of element corruption and how the arcs were built to preserve mankind. Curious as she was to the many breakthroughs with element that had been made since her passing, Weiss held her tongue out of respect, hearing Kato's somber tone. Despite having put aside their differences to join forces, Kato was nevertheless perturbed by Weiss's fixation on element and the Thalassians. And though Weiss had attempted to get him to engage with their many reclaimed items littering her camp, he staunchly refused. This didn't shake her though, as after a day of observing how Kato interacts with the environment's creatures, how he tames, kills, and documents them in a collection of dossiers, Weiss was convinced that he'd eventually come around to recognize the usefulness of the Thalassian tech. In what was likely an attempt to dissuade Weiss from her ongoing infatuation with element, Kato revealed to her his final memories of Earth, how the corruption had taken hold of him and agonizingly ripped his life away. This information gave Weiss pause. Element was something that teemed with possibility, sure, but the horrors Kato had described in dealing with element corruption ominously defied any scientific order she had come to know thus far. Diving further beneath the waves, the two survivors continued to uncover ancient yet functional Thalassian infrastructure, the most important of which being some kind of ancient derelict generator. You know, I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. Oh, yeah, we all have. Though Kato wasn't particularly stricken by the discovery, Weiss was locked the fuck in, convinced that the generator was the key to whatever fate befell the Thalassians. And from the look in her eyes, Kato realizes that, regardless of his presence, she intended to dive deeper, so he follows suit. At this point, both Weiss and Kato had deduced that they were indeed aboard an ark, a broken one at that. Rather than acting as a safe refuge from element corruption as Kato had been led to believe from his time on Earth, this ark, and by extension the entire ark network, instead served as a perilous testing ground for their inhabitants. On Weiss's initiative, the duo ventured deeper and deeper into the Ark, navigating progressively treacherous waters. Their greatest force of adversity, however, came from the growingly aggressive fauna they encountered on their journey into the depths. It wasn't long before the survivors were forced to contend with the influence of element creeping its way into the Ark, in the form of a colossal tridacna afflicted with corruption. Upon coming face to face with this monstrous clam, Kato felt weak, calling back to when he would mercifully hunt the corrupted creatures of Earth en masse in his past life. On the contrary, and against Kato's numerous warnings, Weiss was intrigued with how the tridacna had been altered by element, how it had drastically changed both physically and behaviorally. She kept this curiosity to herself though, as she watched Kato drive his spear into the clam's body, ending its suffering. Unbeknownst to the survivalist, this encounter amounted to more than just a run-in with what he considered to be his greatest enemy, as it only emboldened Weiss's drive to understand more not just about element, but now the corruption as well. In her continued bid to open Kato's eyes to Element's true potential, Weiss successfully restores 2 Thalassian firearms which work underwater. Hesitant as he was, with no other way to effectively dispose of the local predators, Kato begrudgingly takes arms with the Thalassian rifle, questioning whether it was a necessary step in adapting to the Ark, or just another example of the same reckless use of element-based tech that had doomed humanity in the first place. Whichever the case, the threat of increasingly dangerous wildlife meant that for now, the rifle wasn't going to leave his side. Now both Weiss and Kato had one interwoven goal: find the source of the Ark's corruption. For Weiss, that meant being able to get her hands on more of that ever-alluring element. But for Kato, it meant fulfilling what he couldn't in his first life, putting a stop to its spread, here and now, while there's still time. And so, with Weiss staying back to erect a camp at the edge of the ocean's deepest trench, Kato presses forward by himself, at last reaching the abyss. This place was otherworldly, almost aberrant, and inhabited by creatures with a ghastly appearance reflective of the eerie landscape. After returning to camp with the carcasses of several abyssal creatures in tow, Kato deems them to be of no nutritional value. But as he attempted to throw them back off the side of the trench, Weiss intervened, suspecting the presence of element within their corpses. And while Kato prepared to face whatever awaited the two of them down there, Weiss was completely absorbed with the abyssal remains, constructing an infectarium to conduct studies on them. This time, she would show Kato the true capabilities of element. Those creatures weren't corrupted, no, they were simply augmented by the element within them. Surely, this had to change his perspective, right? This, of all things, would open his eyes to element. It had to. She was so close. Distracted with his preparations, Kato had failed to notice Weiss's latest experiment. After multiple days of running tests on the abyssal bodies, she was able to create several infected creatures through the use of infected barnacles, rapidly mutating parasitic hosts that inflict whatever creature they're attached to with similar aquatic abilities to those of the abyssal creatures. But despite her best efforts to prove that element can indeed enhance things rather than corrupt them, Weiss failed to realize the implications of her actions, and how they would consequently affect Kato, knowing his storied history with the xenomaterial. Though she didn't regret her creations, Weiss couldn't help but feel perturbed by the pain they caused Kato, and the look of horror on his face as he turned to put the infected creatures down. Except, he was unable to follow through with killing them. It was apparent to him that, despite their malformed appearance, they weren't corrupted, nor were they in any pain. Rather, they had just been altered to sustain life underwater, as he had been from his own time spent on the Aquatic ARK. Neither survivor spoke for a while after that. A line had clearly been crossed, one which made Weiss question whether or not her pursuit of knowledge was even worth the result. Days drifted by as they carried on with their usual routines, until Weiss broke the shared silence with a single, resolute sentence: "Our mission cannot change." Shortly after, the pair were beset by their next and possibly most important discovery: a Thalassian research lab filled with information on the Arks. Everything from the obelisks to Ascension was documented there. Things that Helena and the others didn't even learn of until the very end of their journey. Things that no ordinary survivor would know unless they had already made their way through the ARK network. All, very conveniently, laid out before Weiss and Kato. Further analysis of the Thalassians' research brought Weiss to a terrible conclusion. The giant structure she and Kato had discovered a while back wasn't a generator for energy's sake, rather, it was a generator for a portal, a rift. It was evident now that in their journey to find the nexus of element within the ARK, the two survivors were treading the same path as the Thalassians had long before their arrival. Weiss sought to understand it, Kato wanted to eradicate it, but the Thalassians, they yearned to embrace it. Their civilization wasn't just built on element, it was consumed by it. Rather than seeking ascension, the Thalassians tore open a rift far, far away to the original source of element itself, both abandoning and destroying the ARK in the process. Ultimately, Weiss and Kato returned to the Abyss, determined to locate the root of element afflicting the Aquatic ARK. It was here, at the very bottom of Aquatica, that they found the thing they were searching for. The heart of the Abyss, the heart of element. Whatever this thing was, it was more than just a part of the environment. It was alive. Element incarnate, not in the form of the corruption, but in something inexplicable that imposed an incomprehensible, almost cosmic horror onto the survivors by its sheer presence alone. Where she had once stood to learn everything she could about element, Weiss could now no longer wait to get away from it, as even she was mortified by the sight towering before them, unable to muster a second look in its direction. Kato pitied the Thalassians. To them, the heart of the Abyss was their salvation, their god. They had harnessed its limitless energy to power their rift generator, blissfully unaware of what element was truly capable of, what it had done to their ancestors' home. Unable to overtake, let alone understand the heart, Kato gave up his mission entirely. There was no saving the ARK. There never was, and there never would be. In the wake of this final discovery, Weiss found herself reflecting upon their Thalassian precursors. What were they searching for? Power? Perfection? To become one with element itself? Whatever the answer, their ambition and hubris had plunged the ARK into its current ruinous state. Concluding that the ocean depths could no longer sustain neither him nor Weiss, Kato bids his creature companions one final goodbye, before facing an ultimatum. He and Weiss were going to leave the ARK behind, not through ascension, but through the way the Thalassians did. Standing again at the foot of the rift generator, the pair were in agreement. Reactivating the ancient device, Dr. Ingrid, Weiss, and Kato stepped together into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited them on the other side. Long after Weiss, Kato, or even Helena and her own friends had survived the ARKs, you find yourself planet-side, having just been respawned onto the beach like a typical Bob. Or maybe you spawned into the Abyss and got your face ripped off by a pack of ravenous shadowmanes. Either way. This time, you aren't playing as the one who tries again, rather, you are but one of the ones who try again. That is to say, an inconsequential drop in the wave pool that is the thousands, if not millions of other survivors which are a part of the ARK network. With no sparkly blue lady to guide you through your journey, you have to rely on your own instincts, intuition, and the writings left behind by Weiss and Kato to survive. With these things in hand, you took what you could from the surface downwards and into the shallows. From there, you built yourself up to face the crushing depths, taming marine life to help you on your way, and creating livable, breathable underwater bases while dispelling of the occasional rift. Holy fucking shit, who caused the third impact? Your path would diverge from your forebears though, as you discovered the ARK's mini caves and their artifacts, using them to challenge the station's 3 unique guardians, the first of which being the Cymathoa. What was once intended to be a battle against the Monstrositas, a giant elder whale, has since festered and taken a turn for the worse. Now, its lifeless, decomposing jaw serves as the Cymathoa's arena and throne. If one corruption spreading through the Ark wasn't enough, the Cymathoa's parasitic biomass consumes everything from the elder whale itself to a space just outside its confines beneath the shallows. The Ark's second guardian is a lot less grotesque and takes the form of a giant vulcanite called the Vulcanithus, a hyper-aggressive yet elegant lava serpent which has been absorbing the energy generated by nearby magma pools for eons. The final guardian's a reskin supply crate. You know, I was actually really surprised by the quality of the Aquatica bosses up until I saw this one specifically. Fractalis is a sentient, reality-shifting element crystal formation that just so happens to look identical to a supply crate and shoots stunning lasers by refracting light. In a cave. Don't ask me how it works, it just does. After slaying the 3 guardians, you dive to the very bottom of the Ark, your newly acquired tributes in hand. Fighting through the abyss and its monstrous creatures, you pass through the Heart of Element and reach the station's final terminal. Upon activating the portal, you're met with Aquatica's Hall of History, something each Ark has in— wait, what the fuck? Because of the Ark's crash landing into the Atlantic Ocean, it would appear that both the Overseer Arena and Hall of History have suffered catastrophic structural damage, both of them now submerged upside down in the deepest parts of the sea. What's worse are the numerous rifts opening just beyond the ruined chambers, their presence crackling with volatile intensity as if the very Ark was tearing itself apart. There was no turning back now. Making your way through the sunken corridors, you're greeted not by the Overseer, but by the Pygocentris Cataclysmus. The Overseer's over there, at the bottom of the Oversea, and as you can see, it's out of energy. The battle is as long as it is arduous. With abilities it had absorbed from the Overseer, the Pygocentris now ruled over Aquatica in the same way Rockwell ruled over Aberration. And like Rockwell, the Pygocentris wasn't going to go down without a fight. But neither were you. Rifts began to tear across the arena as you landed a killing blow on the monster, engulfing everything in a hellish orange light. Maybe the Ark really was tearing itself apart after all. Not that it mattered. Your time here was quickly coming to an end. But something was off. This wasn't the ascension you deserved. No, you would have been lucky to be put on another Ark somewhere far away from the Earth's poisoned surface. Instead, you felt yourself being pulled towards one of the rifts, towards the heart of it all, towards the source of element itself. As for my final thoughts on Aquatica, despite its numerous issues, the DLC as a whole kinda came to grow on me. Listen, Nanos from 3 months ago would not have expected to be saying this right now. And while I still have yet to do a full playthrough of the expansion, I can't say that I outright dislike it or its story. But that's because it was Studio Sirens, baby. A ragtag group of 10 core developers, some of whom would get laid off, roped into the Ark franchise by Snail Games and told to make something, given extremely limited resources. The only significant contribution Snail even had to Aquatica was its abhorrent, signaturely Snail out-of-touch marketing. That said, Aquatica broke a lot of things, from the community's trust to the game as a whole, and had probably the most disastrous launch of anything I have ever seen or will ever see since the likes of Atlas or Cyberpunk 2077. And even though Studio Sirens may have made in what my opinion constitutes at most a 3-star DLC, god damn it, not only did they make something, but they're working day in and day out with the community to fix its broken state. Aquatica's not a masterpiece, far from it, but it's even farther from being awful if you ask me, thanks to Siren's hard work and dedication for the project, something the likes of Snail could never hope to accomplish. Thank you, Studio Sirens, and fuck you, Snail Games. I'd like to give an additional thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for their continued support, including, but not limited to, Nathan Hildebrandt in Hey No Quest of the Ascended Survivor tier. And a special thank you to those at Studio Sirens who answered my lore-centric questions in the writing of this video. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. Really.